Now, according to the syllabus, we have 2 nights for Old English, 2 nights for Middle English, 2 nights for Early Modern English, and then a couple of other nights. We were supposed to do Old English last week. Wait. Did we skip last week? Or is my brain just fuzzy? No, we had the exam last week, right? That's right, because it was the week before that we had the snow problem. Okay. We might do all of the Old English tonight. Okay, we might be able to. If we're able to do all the Old English tonight, we'll definitely be able to do all of the Middle English in one night, which will push us a little bit ahead, in which case we'll probably already have one night in mind that we might drop, but it'll all depend on how tonight goes. Okay, so I'm going to skip everything at the top there. You can read that and look up stuff on your own. One thing I would encourage you, however, the story of English, which is available, using the word video is so old, is available on video. It's probably on CD now, or DVR. In the LRC, it's probably on YouTube. I've not checked, but I wouldn't be surprised. It was a series done for PBS back in mid to late 80s. And it's pretty good. And at times it's a little simplistic, and some of the they've got little acted kind of scenes, and some of that's kind of hokey and stuff. But the content in it is actually pretty good. It takes you from kind of the beginnings of English, roughly the Viking invasions, up to the 20th century and the advent of all the new words, not all of them, but you get the idea, that we see brought into the English language during the 20th century as a result of technology and industry and innovation and all those kinds of things. If you decide to do a paper on something in this period, there's a list of journals there that would be very advantageous to look at. Anglo-Saxon England, it's a serial. They're up to, I think, number 40, 45, something like that. Medium Avum, which has been around a long time. JEGP, which if you find older articles in JEGP, the title will be the Journal of English and Germanic Philology. Its official title now is the abbreviation, JEGP. Neophilologus and the Neuphilologische Mitteilungen are also major medieval studies kinds of journals. They publish a lot. I mean, all of these journals publish a lot on the history and state of the language also in the Middle Ages. Okay? As well as there are books about Sutton, who you're going to see when we get up to, I think it's in here, Sutton Who in a few moments. I've given you a few websites, beginning with Wikipedia, which is actually, I don't disparage Wikipedia like a lot of professors do. Much of it is well done. But there are quite a few others, and there's a lot of publications out there on the Sutton Hoo discovery, and we'll talk about how it relates to the history of the English language. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, which means prior to the Anglo-Saxons, okay? The prehistory of Great Britain. We know it's been inhabited by modern humans since 50,000 BC. We know it's been inhabited by pre-modern humans. I was just reading something the other day. It said for about 800,000 years. Okay? There was just a little discovery announced the other day of wheat. I'm trying to know how to put this. We know wheat was grown in southern Britain as early as 8000 BC. Okay, wheat is entirely a domesticated crop. Okay, so we know that somebody was farming it as of 8000 BC. Okay, which means earlier than on the rest of the European continent, except for extreme southern Europe, like southern France, southern Italy. Okay, Stonehenge. Notice I've got a question mark there. You read some material on Stonehenge, and it gets dated back to 2000, 2500 BC. Kind of the, I don't like using this word consensus because it's misleading. The general agreement is that it probably dates from about 1600, maybe 2000. Okay, in terms of its earliest figuration. Okay, Stonehenge was built, over a period of 1,000 years. It began as one thing, it got added to, it kind of fell apart, it got added to again, etc. The big stones that are there now probably date from about 1600 BC. And archaeologists are still making discoveries there annually. Okay, just about 10 years ago, they were doing a dig and discovered an archer. They know he was an archer because they found portions of his bow with him. And he also had an arrow stuck in his, I think it was his left shoulder blade. So this was a guy who had been shot and then buried. They don't know why he was shot. Obviously, we can't discover that kind of stuff. But he was buried, and he was buried with some grave goods. I mean, there was some gold material and several other things. They've just done, last year, they've done a kind of a sonic topography of the entire Wiltshire plain that Stonehenge is on, and have discovered a whole slew of additional archaeological sites they never knew about. Okay, garbage pits, burial sites, etc. In fact, they've even discovered what they think was, in this prehistoric time, the remains of a small village. I mean, where it could be seen, there had been post holes, there had been rooms and buildings and things like that. Okay, so that's all prehistory. Okay, the Celts. The Celts come in or enter the picture. We've already talked about the Celts a little bit with Indo-European. The Celts come in probably mid-8th century BC. So probably 750 to 850 BC, or BCE if you want to use that terminology. But when we talk about the Celts in Britain, we kind of divide them into two groups. So Britons in the south meaning south of what today is Hadrian's Wall, which Hadrian's Wall goes right about across here. If you can see the cursor there, right around there, okay? It's not quite accurate, but that's pretty close. So the Britons would be everywhere south of that, and the Picts are everywhere north of that, okay? We have writing left from the Picts, and we have writing left from the Britons. The Picts invented a style of writing called Ogham, O-G-H-A-M, which is a series of lines, okay? You have a line like this, and then it would have a series of like hash lines like that and things like that off to the side. And it wasn't until the mid-20th century, I believe, that Ogham writing was deciphered. So it can be read. It's not very useful for, relating stories and such, because you can't get into nuance and things like that. Okay? So Britons in the south, Picts in the north. The Romans enter. Okay, so the Celts are there by themselves for 700 years, give or take a little bit. Okay? The Romans enter the picture. Caesar invades, that is Julius Caesar, invades in 55 BC. Okay? Claudius annexes Britannia in 43 AD. Okay, that is, between 55 BC and 43 AD, Britannia, or the Isle of Great Britain as we call it today, was not a Roman province. It was an outpost. All right? But one of the important things that happens here, or one of the reasons why this is important, is because with the advent of Roman soldiers, what else also enters Britain? What language do they speak? Latin. Okay? So Latin enters Britain. First, it enters merely because of the soldiers. But as garrisons get posted there, and it was a common practice for Roman garrisons, for soldiers to send for their wives and families. Okay? So you start to get Roman citizens coming over. They start to build the large villas. And you get almost seems like you get a new Roman villa discovered about every 4 or 5 years in England with all kinds of archaeological artifacts. But you get this development of these large Roman villas. You get this development of wineries and things like that. Not great wine in England, but so Latin enters the language. Okay, this is the first instance of Latin entering the language. So you start to get a mixture of kind of a Romano-Celtic culture, because not only are the Roman soldiers bringing their wives from their homelands, wherever those homelands would be, because not all Roman soldiers came from Rome. Roman soldiers came from what is today France. They came from what is today parts of Turkey. They came from what is today part of southern Germany. Okay. But you also had Romans then intermarrying with Celtic women. Okay. You also had, along with the advent of the troops, commerce. Okay. They were interested in Britain for for two big reasons. One, tin. Okay. Huge tin mines. And two, English oak. What today is called English oak. Okay. These massive oak forests, which Rome needed to build their galleys, their warships that they used to ply the Mediterranean. All right. So, Latin's introduced. It's a second language, essentially, alongside Celtic. Now, it's interesting that when Rome intervenes, when Rome invades Britain, the Celts don't all flee. They do fight. They lose. They become a subject people, okay? But they stay. This is going to be different than what happens when the Germanic tribes enter, okay? So they're there. The Romans are there until about 410 AD. So over 450 years, where you have Romans at the top of society and Celts at the bottom of society. And then in between, a mixture. Okay? The Roman garrisons leave in 410 because Rome is sacked by the Huns. Okay? And the Roman emperor, you have two emperors at this point. You got one in Rome and you have one in Constantinople. The Roman emperor calls for all the outposted garrisons to come back to Rome, to defend Rome. Okay? Nature abhors a vacuum. When the Roman troops leave, there's a huge sucking sound. Because the Picts, who have been up north, realize that once the garrisons leave, southern Britain is theirs for the picking. Okay? See, during the period of the Roman occupation, 55 BC to 410 AD, as I said, you had Roman garrisons, you have plenty of Roman troops, you have entire Roman towns, you have Roman roads made, okay? And one of the things the Romans do is not only to control the country, but they keep the natural enemies away. The natural enemies at this point are the Picts up here in Scotland, okay, and to some extent also the Irish over here, and a little bit of what would later be called the Welsh, okay. I mentioned Hadrian's Wall, which was right around there. Hadrian was a Roman emperor who had this wall built in the mid-2nd century, I believe. 140s, I think it was. And he had the wall built, and this isn't a wall like this is a wall. Hadrian's Wall is, at points, because you can walk along it today, at points it is 30 feet wide. And ranges from 10 to 15 feet to 30 feet tall. It has rooms built inside the wall for garrisons to live in. Just last year, a little bit of trivia, just last year at Vindolanda, which is one of the garrison camps, done? Yeah, you can just bring it to me. At Vindolanda, which is an important site in and of itself because about 30 or 40 years ago, if I remember correctly, wax tablets were discovered there. And these are wax tablets with Roman writing on them because the Romans didn't have paper. They wrote on wax. Wax is very useful. It gets hard, you get a stylus, and you can write whatever you want on it, and you can hand it to somebody, and they can copy it, do whatever. And then when you're done with it, all you have to do is heat it, and it becomes nice and smooth again. Okay? Well, at Vindolanda last year, a toilet seat was discovered. A Roman toilet seat. First one ever. Rome was everywhere. Okay? And archaeologists were going just absolutely batso about this. A real Roman toilet seat. Because of the shape, the size. It said something about the shape and size of Roman soldiers. All that kind of stuff. Anyways. So, Hadrian's Wall was pretty massive. It wasn't built to keep the Britons in. It was built to keep the Picts out. Okay? The Picts were very fierce. Rome tried to go up into Scotland and conquer. They couldn't. Just like they tried, if we had more of this map, just like they tried to go north of the Rhine River, which is down here. They couldn't. Every time they tried, the Germanic tribes defeated them in a couple of really major battles. One of the battle sites was just discovered about 5 years ago. I mean, just a slew of bones and artifacts. Okay? So, the Romans leave. The Picts suddenly realize it's ours for the taking. Okay? So the Picts start to invade. Okay? Now, just about everything from here on that I'm going to say about the history up until about 750 AD comes from Bede, the first English historian who writes his ecclesiastical history of the English people in 731, publishes it, so to speak, in 731. Okay? Germanic invasions began around 449, 450, according to Bede. Okay? Tacitus, who's a Roman historian, tells us about the Germanic tribes in about 95 AD, okay, in his book called Germania, meaning the Germans, or the German people, if you want. An important bit of information to keep in mind, however, about Tacitus is that he's writing the Germania to shame the Romans. Okay? Because Roman culture, by the end of the first century, it was really decadent. I mean, you'd already seen Nero proverbially fiddle while Rome burned. You saw Nero use Christians, as nightlights to line the Appian Way and such. You have the vomitoriums in full vigor at this point, where people would have these huge parties where they'd eat till they're sick to their stomachs. They'd go to the next door, they'd vomit, and then they'd come back and just eat and eat even more. If you're into the Hunger Games, the depiction of the capital city, it comes right out of ancient Rome. Okay? Panem stands for bread and circuses, which was, the whole Roman idea. Give people bread, give them the circuses to distract them from their problems, and everything will be fine. Okay? So Tacitus describes the German people. He describes German culture. He describes German warriors. And he describes German warriors as, these almost like godlike beings. That these guys will fight until the end. And they'll fight to defend their honor and their women and their way of life. And he even describes, having seen battles where there would be a battle of Germans, and it might be one tribe against another tribe. And he describes how lovers and wives of the German soldiers would stand kind of on a hillside above the battle and bare their breasts and yell, "This is what you're fighting for." And that would just send the Germans into kind of berserker mode. Okay? And Tacitus loves this. He's like, why aren't we like this? Why don't we fight like these men do? Because again, remember, the Germans kept defeating them. So eventually what you had set up over here in northern Germany, around this area, is you've got a kind of a demilitarized zone between the Germans and the Romans. But then the Romans kind of realized, we can't defeat them. Let's hire them. And they pay the Germans. They hire the Germans as mercenaries. Okay? And they weren't the only ones. We know Germans were hired, for example, to be palace guard at the Vatican, palace guard in Constantinople, because we have German graffiti on the Church of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. It's essentially, the German version of George was here, kind of a thing. Okay? So Tacitus praises the Germans. Gildas, he's a British monk, Welsh, who writes kind of a diatribe against the Britons in 545. The reason Gildas is important, well, there's a couple of reasons. One, he talks about the defeat of the Saxons at Mount Baden. Okay? The Saxons are Germans. They're defeated by this kind of Romano-British army. Okay? Keep in mind, the Romans are gone. So when I say Romano-British, I mean these are people who now live there who are descended from the mixture of Romans and Celts, okay, or Romans and British. He describes the defeat of the Saxons at Mount Baden. Mount Baden is supposed to be King Arthur's greatest victory against the Germanic tribes. Gildas mentions nothing about Arthur. He does mention a guy named Ambrosius Aurelianus, something like that, okay? Which some scholars take, that's his way of referring to Arthur, but we don't know for sure, okay? Bede, in 731, as I said, writes his ecclesiastical history of the English people. Among other things, Bede was a true polymath. That is, he did everything. He wrote about musical theory. He wrote about geometry. He wrote about astronomy. He wrote about languages. He wrote biblical commentaries over many of the books of the Bible. Okay, your proto-Renaissance man. He was everything. It's from Bede, in fact, that we get the way of ordering time according to before Christ, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. That determination. Okay? Bede, in the ecclesiastical history of the English people, he begins by talking about the founding of Britain. He talks about the flora and the fauna, the topography, the first people that came there, and when he means the first people, he means the descendants of Aeneas, Trojans. Okay? But then he talks about the coming of these three Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. Okay? And he tells us why they come. And according to Bede, a British chieftain who lived in this area, blow that up some. Lived in this area, which is called East Anglia, named Vortigern. Vortigern. It's pretty sure he's mentioned in your book. Vortigern was having problems because the Picts are coming down from the north. Okay? And he knows that the Germanic tribes are mercenaries. And so he sends a letter to the Germanic people asking for help. And the tribes send help, beginning around 449, 450. Okay? What the Germanic tribes quickly come to realize is, if you look at the map, okay, you got the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes here, Britain down here. Just notice latitudinally, okay, this area of England and South is quite a ways farther south than here. It's a better climate. Okay? And what the Germanic tribes quickly come to realize is it's more temperate down here. Now, again, we're talking modern language, England, which for where we are in Tennessee right now, England is on the same latitude as Nova Scotia in northeastern Canada. Okay? So for the Germans to want to move down to Nova Scotia, essentially, it's telling you how bad it is in modern-day Denmark, because that's what all of this is. That's modern-day Denmark. Okay? So, yeah, they come and they help deal with the Pict problem, but then they stick around and they start dealing with the British problem. Okay? And you'll get two different approaches to this by historians, especially real contemporary historians. You'll hear these Germanic moves called either invasions or migrations. Okay? Migration is what kind of term? Is it negative? It's positive. They're looking for a better life. Invasion implies they're looking for a better life by taking yours. Okay? Migration implies there's room for everybody. But apparently there wasn't. Okay? And here's why. Now, keep in mind, I've said that throughout Britain, these people were Romano-Celtic. Okay? Well, interestingly, when the Germanic tribes start to come over, apparently the native peoples do one of two things. They fight and lose, or they flee. That is, they don't stick around to be subjugated. They don't stick around to become second class, bottom of the social heap, as it were. How do we know this? Well, the language that is primarily spoken, okay, at this time in Britain is, again, it's primarily Celtic. It has Roman or Latin overtones. It has a lot of Latin borrowings and such, but it's still primarily Celtic. Yet, what happens when the Germanic tribes come in isn't what normally happens when a people is conquered by another country or another language group. Usually what happens at that point is the conquered language filters into the dominant language by the dominant people having to learn that conquered language, okay, for everyday kind of things. That doesn't happen with Celtic. You're going to see when we get a little bit later on. We have very, very few Celtic words that survive in modern English. There's about 20. 20. Okay? Whereas there should be thousands. And here's why. When the Germanic tribes invade, as I said, the native peoples fight and lose or flee. They flee to 3 different areas, 3 to 4 different areas. And I don't remember if there's a map of this or not. They flee this is point of work. Nope. They flee either north up to Scotland, they flee either They flee either north up to Scotland, up here. They flee either west over into Wales. Wales is very mountainous, very hard to attack, very easy to defend. Or they flee down southwest into Devonshire and Somerset and Cornwall. And from there, those that don't stay there, they flee south across the English Channel to an area of France that is still today called Brittany. The E ending indicates it's diminutive, Little Britain, where they spoke Breton, a form of Celtic, not French at all. Okay? Let me back this back up. So, the Celts flee. They leave behind little of their language. As you're going to see, the terms that do get left behind are largely topographical or place names, river names, like Avon, Thames, Severn, Usk. Okay? And then a couple of topographical features like crag, coombe, as in the Cumberland Valley or the Cumberland Plateau or the Cumberland Gap. Okay. And this map is a little misleading, by the way, because it implies that they come straight across the North Sea, that the Germanic tribes do. It's not what's thought really happened. It's thought that what really happened is that as the Germanic tribes came over, and I'm going to talk about where they settled in just a moment, is that they kind of hopscotch along the northwestern coast of Europe. These islands right here are called the Frisian Islands. Frisian is the closest Germanic relative to English. If you know Old English, you can read Old Frisian. They developed differently after that period, but it's still pretty close. Dutch is closer to English than it is to German. Okay? Now, where do they settle? Again, according to Bede. Okay? Again, these are the Jutes up here in northern Denmark. These are the Angles in middle Denmark, and these are the Saxons in southern Denmark. Well, the Angles settle in this area right here, the middle part of England. It's still called today Anglia. You have the University of East Anglia right over in here. Okay, so that's where all the Angles settle. The Jutes settle in a little area right in here, right where that cross is. Okay, pretty much the area of Kent, okay, where Canterbury is. The Saxons settle all down here. This whole area, in fact, becomes called the Saxon coast. You have Wessex, West Saxon, Sussex, South Saxon, Essex, East Saxon. London is in part of Essex, where the East Saxons dwelt. Okay? Christianization of England. Again, all of this is from Bede. Okay, Christianity had been in Britain from Roman times. Obviously not pre-Christ, but according to tradition, Joseph of Arimathea, okay, the one who provided for Christ's tomb, he was the first one to bring Christianity to Britain. Okay, the first British martyr, however, is St. Alban, who died sometime in the early 3rd century, 209 to 303, 3rd to 4th century. Okay, probably around 250. Okay, we know that there were other Christians before St. Alban, but he's the first martyr. That is, he's specifically singled out because, if I remember right, he was a deacon in the church, and he wouldn't do something, he wouldn't swear something that the Roman emperor at the time wanted him to swear. Christianity is in Ireland by the mid-4th century, that is the mid-350s. It's in Scotland by the late 5th, the late 400s, with St. Columba proselytizing in the 6th century. So it's established in Celtic Britain from the 3rd century on. Okay? This is before there is a quote-unquote Catholic Church. This is long before Catholicism per se. This is just plain old ordinary early church kind of Christianity. Okay? But then the Germanic tribes move in. They're pagan. They are fully pagan. They are card-carrying believers in Thor and Odin and Frigg and Freya and the whole, pantheon of the Germanic Aesir and Vanir gods. Okay? Christianity gets largely, not entirely, but largely wiped out. There are still pockets. You have Christian churches in Wales that survive, that are continuously served. Okay? But when the Germanic tribes come in, they do a number on the church. In the late 6th century, Pope Gregory I, Gregory the Great, the one from whom we get Gregorian chant, he sends Augustine, later he's St. Augustine of Canterbury, to England in 597. And he does this because of an experience that he had in one of the Roman slave markets prior to his becoming pope. I think this happened when he was an archbishop or a bishop. He was in the slave market and he met two young individuals. I believe they were early adolescent or teens. Blonde, blonde, blue eyes, fair complected and everything. And through a translator, I guess, he asks them who they are, and they tell him that they are Angli. He asks them if they know about Jesus, and they say no, they know nothing about him. And he makes a pun on their name. He says, no, you're not Angli, you are Angeli, Angelus, angels, because of their appearance. And when he finds out they don't know anything of the gospel, he resolves somebody's got to bring the gospel to them. Okay? 597, he's already pope now. He sends Augustine. Okay? Augustine is from the Eastern Church, Constantinople. Okay? Augustine doesn't want to go because he's heard stories about the Germanic people and the Germanic tribes. Other people have tried to bring Christianity to the Germanic tribes and didn't go so well. Heads lopped off, things like that. But Augustine goes. Okay? Your book talks about the Christianization. They get an okay welcome from King Ethelbert of Kent. His wife is Christian. That's important. She's the daughter of Clovis, I think it is, King of France at this time. He's, kind of non-committal. But within a few years, Christianity is spreading like wildfire. I think it is within a year of Augustine's arrival 10,000 people have been converted. Okay, this is not the kind of conversion you hear about later with Charlemagne. Conversion at the point of a sword. These are non-coerced conversions. And Bede gives a wonderful account of the conversion of King Edwin of Northumbria. Okay, because there's multiple kings there. There's not a single king of Britain. And Edwin of Northumbria, he's kind of a smart guy. He consults with his priests, his pagan priests. And in Bede's account, one of the priests tells Edwin, in fact, the chief priest tells Edwin, let me back up a minute. Edwin has a vision. Before, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the missionary who comes north. It's not Augustine, it's somebody else at this point. Edwin has a vision, and in the vision, the God speaks to him and says, this is going to happen to you, and when this happens to you, listen to the man who does this. And what happens to him is this guy comes and puts his hand on his head. He wakes up from his dream, and he thinks, okay, that was weird. This missionary comes up with a group of other followers, puts his hand on his head, he's like, okay, and tells him of the gospel. And Edwin says, I've got to consult my advisors. You know, he's a diplomatic individual. He's going to consult his cabinet, as it were. And he does, and Coifi, the chief of his priests, says, Lord, our religion has no efficacy. That is, it doesn't work. Because if it did, I should have a much better life than I have right now. Because I am the most faithful to our religious system, to our beliefs, to our gods. I pray to them, I sacrifice to them. You treat me like dirt. I mean, he actually says this kind of stuff. I don't get what the kind of treatment you ought to treat me with, etc. And if the gods were just, and if they were real, that would never happen. And another one of the priests then kind of speaks up also. And he says, Lord, it seems to me that this is the life of man. And he uses this beautiful kind of poetic analogy. And he says, the life of man, it's like a sparrow flying in the air in the winter. It's cold, it's storming, there's snow. And then that sparrow flies through an open window of a hall. Keep in mind, windows didn't have glass. So it flies through the open window of a hall. And what does it experience while it's in the hall? It experiences light. It experiences warmth. It experiences laughter. It experiences revelry from the people singing and having fun. And it keeps flying through that hall. And it flies out the other end. And he says, that's like the life of man. We don't know where we come from, and then we're here for a while, and we have a little bit of light, and we have a little bit of warmth, and we have some laughter and some good times, and then we leave, and we don't know where we're going. And he says, that's our religion. If this new religion tells us where we come from and where we go, it seems like a better bet. It seems like a better religion to me. And Edwin is converted at that point. Okay? So, within 100 to 150 years, pretty much the whole island has become Christian. So, by 700 to 750, say 750 to be safe, everybody is a Christian. Now, does that mean they're all, Bible-believing fundamentalists? No. Are there pockets of paganism? Yes. Are there holdouts? Yes. Do pagans still kill Christians? Yes. We have numerous examples. We know that happens. But, by and large, Christianity has spread again throughout the country. So, it profoundly influences Anglo-Saxon culture. How? Cadman and his hymn. Cadman was a sheep herder, associated with the monasteries of Wearmouth and Yarrow, and he lived around 680. Okay? We don't know when he actually died, but we know that the gift, quote unquote, of song came to him in the last year of Abbess Hild's life. She died in 681. Okay, so around 680, 681, Caedmon has this experience, again, recounted by Bede. According to Bede, Caedmon is sitting at the feasting table in the hall, and it's the common custom in the hall for beer to go around the table and for the harp to follow. Actually, the event that Bede describes this as is Yebershipa, beership. It's a party, essentially, but it's in a monastery. Okay? Keep in mind, they drink ale like, the French drink wine. It's like water. Okay? Caedmon can't sing. It doesn't mean he can't carry a tune. It means he doesn't know the native Germanic alliterative pattern and tradition. He doesn't know how to create the poetry. So whenever the harp would come, he'd see it making his way to him. He'd get up and excuse himself. He'd leave. One night he gets up, he goes out to the cow shed, he falls asleep. And he has a vision. And in the vision, a person speaks to him and says, Caedmon, sing to me. He says, I can't sing. Caedmon, sing to me. What shall I sing, Lord? Sing to me of creation. And this is what he sings. It's not the version I'm used to doing, because it's got a couple of words in there I'm not used to. I'm going to drop a couple of words. Nu schulen herian haven reaches werd, mech todes machta und his modjathunk. Werk wulder fader, swachi wundrich was, echa drichten or anstelda. He erst shop den bernum, havet hrova highly shippend. Tha middenjard mankennis ward, echa drichten after teada, firm folden freya almichti. What Caedmon learned in that vision was how to create Germanic alliterative poetry. Okay? The reason it's significant is this is the first time in the European vernacular languages, that is, the languages everyday ordinary people spoke, it's the first time those languages are used for Christian purposes. Okay? Obviously, I'm not including what's called Koine Greek, the everyday ordinary Greek spoken by Greek individuals, for example, in the time of Christ, because that's the language that was spoken. There was lots of Christian stuff written in that. Okay? It's a little bit different. But in terms of French, German, Italian, Spanish, this is the earliest. Nobody else beats this. Okay? And so we see this alliterative pattern being used, and it's going to open the floodgates. Now, the next morning, Caedmon goes to his supervisor, tells him what happened. Supervisor takes him to Abbess Hild. Abbess Hild, knowing what John the Evangelist says in his letters about testing the spirits to be sure whether they're from God or not, she says, okay, Caedmon, we're going to test you to see whether or not this is really from God. You're going to go with these nice men, a couple of priests, and they're going to tell you some Bible stories. You come back tomorrow, not in a week, not in 2 weeks. You come back tomorrow, and you convert these stories you hear into poems. Talk about a final exam. Okay? And Bede tells us the stories that Caedmon converts into poems. The story of the creation of the world, the story of Daniel in the lion's den, the story of Exodus and such. Okay? There just so happens to be a manuscript called Junius 11 at Oxford University that has a whole bunch of Old English poems that are all on these biblical themes. Up until the 20th century, it was called the Caedmon manuscript because it had the poems about the themes that Caedmon was supposed to have created poetry about. Nobody thinks Cadman composed any of those poems, for stylistic reasons, for one thing. Okay? We have no actual record of any other poems Cadman composed. Keep in mind, he was illiterate. Okay? So this is composed all up here, on the fly. And we could talk about alliteration and such, which has a pretty big importance in terms of later Anglo-Saxon poetry, and even later English poetry, but we won't get into that. Take my 3010 course if you haven't already, and we'll go into it then. Okay, on to Sutton Hoo. Everything that we're doing in this first part, okay, before we get to the actual language, it's kind of what's called the external history of the language. It's things that are external to the actual sounds and morphology and things like that. Okay, Sutton Hoo. What is Sutton Hoo? Yes. Sutton Hoo is a place in England. It's in East Anglia. It's kind of hard to get to. It's kind of a pain to get to, actually. It's almost like they don't want you to go. That in 1938, a woman who owned this property, Mrs. Bede, knew that these mounds on her property had to be burial mounds. And these are big mounds. I'm not talking like 5 and 6 foot mounds. A couple of these mounds are 50 feet tall and 100 feet wide. Okay? She knew they had to be burial mounds. And so she asked the local archaeologist, a guy named Basil Brown, to do a dig. This gives you, let me see here. This gives you an overview kind of the site. I don't think I can get a bigger picture of it. These are all mounds. These are from a drawing from, looks like the 18th century. Anyways, this guy, Basil Brown, says, okay, he goes in and he starts to excavate one of the mounds, the biggest mound. He's going to go for the jackpot. And he digs a trench, and he discovers one. Other grave diggers have been there in the past. Okay. But he keeps going. And he realizes there is something here. Okay. This is Mound 2. This was excavated in 1987. Let's see if I can find. Here you've got a body. I'm trying to find the original horse. Yeah, there it is. He finds the outlines of a ship. A long ship, like a Viking ship. But it predates the Vikings. What you see here are the outlines in sand of the ribs of the ship. And along here, the dark lines, okay, aren't actually lines of the wood. They're rust left from the rivets. Okay? This ship was over 100 feet long. About 40 feet in diameter, if I remember correctly. Okay? And what they find is, let me go back to, what they find are just these amazing treasures or artifacts. Now, because this material is found in the ground, they have to have a coroner's inquest because they have to determine who owns it. See, in British law, because there's so much buried stuff around, you have to have a coroner's inquest to determine whether or not the material that is brought out of the ground is grave goods, meaning it was put in the ground and meant to stay in the ground with the dead person forever. Or treasure. It was put in the ground and meant to be dug up later, and you put it in the ground so that somebody else wouldn't get it. Okay? So they had to have a coroner's inquest to determine why it was there. One of the pieces of evidence they used in the coroner's inquest was a passage from Beowulf, about 20 lines long. And the passage was where the poet describes Scyld-Scefing's burial. Talks about, Scyld-Scefing sat leaning up against the mast and all this treasure put around him, his shield and his helmet and his sword and his coat of mail and all this other kind of stuff. This is all stuff that was found at Sutton Hoo. Okay? Would one of you kill the light for a minute? This will show up a little bit better. What you see here, all these little rough spots, this is what actually remained of this helmet. All this other material, this is leather that the original portions have been put on. Okay? Based upon the size of the pieces that are left, they're able to do analysis that shows what the remaining size of the helmet would be. This is either a dragon or a goose. I don't know about you, dragon makes it sound a lot cooler kind of thing. But that's gold. Okay? That's the helmet that's found. It's thought this is probably a ceremonial helmet. This thing would not have been worn into battle. Okay? This, are you going to load? This is a reconstructed version of the helmet. Okay? And you can see these patterns on here. These are actually these men that look like they're kind of dancing or maybe fighting with each other. Because the helmet, we're almost positive, the helmet came from Sweden. Okay? And there was a factory in Sweden that made a dye of these patterns because there are other helmets with the exact same patterns on them. I don't know why these other links aren't working. There you go. This is thought to be a scepter. Some people think it's a whetstone, like for sharpening swords on. But it's got a little cup right here that, oddly enough, fits perfectly on a kneecap. And it's surrounded on the top with a stag. Okay? The sword. Again, very corroded, okay, but it does survive. This hanging bowl. I'm not going to go through all of these. This actually has decoration and glasswork in it, and this, this bowl is like this big. Okay. There are other bowls and spoons. The spoons, okay, notice the bowls, by the way, the cross on them. These come, if I remember right, these come from Constantinople, and they're silver. Okay, the spoons, which are also silver, have two names written on them. One name on one spoon, one name on another spoon. Saulos, S-A-U-L-O-S, and Paulos, P-A-U-L-O-S. It's thought they're baptismal spoons to show the change from Saul to Paul. Okay? One other thing. I take it back. A couple other things. Come on. This belt buckle, once it shows up, this is about, I wish I had my phone with me. It's about 4.5 inches long, about 2.25 inches wide, and about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch thick, and it's solid gold. All the black parts that you see in here, that's not shadow. That is inlaid stone. And if I could blow this up, I don't think I can. Nope, that's just search. Oh, yes, I can. What was I going to say? Oh, you see each of those little dots? That's an inlaid stone. Now, go from there to this. Come on. This is a purse lid, and then we'll get back to the notes. All the white background's like styrofoam. It's just backing. Okay? See if this will go even larger. Nope. Okay? This is gold, and the red stone is garnet. And this kind of work is called cloisonné. And if we could blow this up even larger, what you would see, you also see the little bit of blue there? That's lapis lazuli. If we could blow it up even larger, what you would see is underneath the gold and underneath the lapis lazuli, there are little lines. Those little lines are gold filament wire, like the thickness of a human hair. Okay. This is quality workmanship that cannot be replicated today. We don't know how to do this the way they were able to do this. This is in the height of what's commonly called the Dark Ages. Okay? Now, one of the interesting things about Sutton Hoo, close all tabs. That's fine. You can turn the lights back on. One of the interesting things about Sutton Hoo is who may have been buried there or who may have been commemorated there. It's not thought that anyone was actually buried there. At first, they thought maybe it was. Now it's thought to be a cenotaph. A cenotaph is a burial that's a commemoration, maybe for a body that's lost. Okay? It's thought that the person who was buried there was a guy named King Radwald, who was a king of East Anglia, Raedwald. Radwald's interesting because he's someone who became a Christian, thus the baptismal spoons, but then he apostatized. He built a church, and right next to the church he built a pagan shrine to the Germanic gods. Okay? Sutton Hoo, I mentioned, the ship. The nearest body of water to the burial spot, the mound, is 2 miles, and it's uphill. They sailed the ship up the Deben River, brought it ashore, and then pulled it, rolling it on tree trunks for 2 miles uphill. And then they put it not in a hole in the ground. They just left it on the ground and brought in dirt to cover it. Okay? And there are over 20 of these burial mounds at the Sutton Hoo site. Interestingly, if you go to Stonehenge, take a study abroad thing, go to England, go on a tour of Stonehenge, look at all the pretty rocks, and then turn your back to the rocks. And look at all 360 degrees around Stonehenge. and almost every single degree point of the compass, you will see a mound off in the distance. Okay, they are all over England. Okay. We talked about Latin being introduced to Britain. When did it first come? With the Roman army, okay, beginning with Caesar in 55 BC. It comes again with the Christian missionaries, okay. And we're going to see that there are three levels. This is going to be in the notes later on. There are kind of three levels of Latin influence on the English language. One through Celtic, okay, via the Roman army. Second through the Christianization, and then later on again through, well, let me back up. One, continentally, that is through the influence or the contact between the Roman armies and the Germans on the continent. Okay, words like dish enter Germanic at that point, which then come into our language, and then through Celtic, and then again through the church. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. I need to blow this up some. You've got 7 kingdoms. Okay, the Picts and Scots don't count. Northumbria, and there's still a large section of England today called Northumbria. It's pretty much the whole area north of the Humber River, which is up here. Okay. Then you have Mercia, right here in the middle. The East Angles, Wessex, Kent, South Saxons. You can look at that. You've got it on your notes. Go back to how size I had. So let's start talking about the Viking invasions. Viking invasions began in the late 8th century. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle puts them at 787, but it's an error. We know it's an actual error in the Chronicle. It should say 789. And it reads, Her nom Bertrich, King offen Doktor Erdberga, and an his dagum quomen erst 3 shipu. And thus areva there rad, and he wilde driva to thas kinningas tunet the he niste what he weran, and hina mon afslog. That wherein the Aristan shipu Danishra mana the Angelkinnes long Yoseften. This year King Bertrick took Edburga, the daughter of Offa, to wife, and in his days came first 3 ships. And then the reeve, the sheriff, rode thereto, and he would drive them to the king's town because he knew not what they were. And there was he slain. These were the first ships of the Danish men that sought the land of the English nation. We don't know if they were actually Danish. The Anglo-Saxons pretty much referred to all the Vikings as one of 2 words, Danes or heathens, because the 2 terms were synonymous. Okay, keep in mind, I mean, this is almost 800. England's been Christian for at least 50 years. It's been becoming Christian for at least 200 years. Right? Christianity wouldn't reach Denmark for about another 100 years. And it would only reach Denmark because Christian missionaries from England went to Denmark and Germany and Sweden and Norway to Christianize them. Okay? Vikings were called, as I said, Danes, but they're actually made up of Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes. Not many Swedes. Swedes tended to go more eastward into Russia. Okay, the very name Rus, okay, which is where Russia gets its name from, It's a Germanic word, ultimately meaning red. First invasions involved plundering. Later they became settlers. I don't have a map on this one, but if you were to see where they came, Norway, Denmark's over here, Sweden's way over here. They came down, and what they started to do is just hitting the coastline. Okay? One of the first places hit, one of the major places hit, the Isle of Lindisfarne, what's called the Holy Island, off the northeast coast, of England. It's right up here, in fact. Okay? Beautiful monastery there that was sacked, burned, destroyed. Okay? One of the things that happens as a result of the Vikings is the loss of English literature, because they burn libraries. They see nothing worthwhile in them unless they see gospel books which have gold covers on them. They take the books, they rip the book out, they take the gold, they burn the book. Okay? So again, they're hitting coastlines. Only after they start to get more daring and courageous and realizing that the English aren't fighting back that well do they start sailing up the rivers and hitting towns more inland. Okay? After a while, they come, like they'll come in fall, and they'll stay over for the winter and then go back home. Then they start coming and staying. Okay? They start to live in England. Old Norse and Old English, with a little bit of work, they can be mutually intelligible. So you could have a Viking marry an Anglo-Saxon woman and they would be able to communicate. And keep in mind, when they weren't fighting, there was some trade going on between them. Okay? The Vikings introduced Old Norse into England. This is pretty important. It especially takes root in the north of England, in the area that's called the Danelaw, where if you go today, for example, to Yorkshire in England, probably 90% of the towns have names that come from Old Norse. Or they have components of their names that come from Old Norse, like the word or the affix ending by, like Grimsby, okay, or Willoughby. Okay, the by comes from B. We see that word in modern English in another context. We see it at the beginning of a word, like bylaws. What's the B mean? It means settlement. Okay, Grim's settlement, Willow's settlement. Okay, borough is another one. Comes from the Viking word for burg, settlement, town, fortress. Okay, so Murfreesboro, the borough ending, that's Old Norse. Okay, we'll talk more about the actual language influence later. Alfred. Notice his name. Alfred means elf wise or elf counseled. He's not named that after he defeats the Vikings. He's named that before. Probably like, his mother named him the way most people name their children today. They want to give a good name, an auspicious name. That kind of implies supernaturally wise. Okay? Alfred, by the way, never should have been king. He was the fifth son. 4 older brothers. Only one of them was king before him. I think the others all either died or one was mentally incompetent, unable to. He's the only English king with the epithet the Great, which tells you something about what the English think of him. That's his statue in Winchester. If you go down to Winchester, which is where Alfred had his capital of Wessex. He becomes king of Wessex in 871. Okay? He defeats Guthrum the Dane in 878. Between 878 and 871, he's not doing so well. Guthrum the Dane and other Danes are just beating the snot out of him. And in fact, Winter of 877, I believe it is, Alfred spends the winter in the marshes of Somersetshire because he has fled from the Danes. Okay? He comes out, he attacks Guthrum, he is severely outnumbered, and he defeats Guthrum the Dane. Okay? Treaty of Wedmore, I don't think I have that in the notes. Wedmore in 878. Treaty of Wedmore does a couple of things. It establishes the Dane law. Okay, that is an area that the Danes have control in. You can see it here. It goes from up here around Anglesey, okay, down around the middle of Mercia, excludes London, over to Kent, and all of this area is the Dane law. All of this area is essentially Alfred's. Okay? So the Danes make out pretty well. Alfred pretty much gives over the keys to the kingdom because he is outnumbered. Even though he defeated Guthrum, he is still outnumbered. Okay? Another thing that happens as a result of the treaty, though, Guthrum agrees to become a Christian and agrees to never take arms against Alfred again. And according to history, he abides by both those aspects of the treaty. He apparently becomes a real, believing Christian. Alfred is his godfather. Don't think Marlon Brando. A godfather in the church means someone who oversees your education in the church, your following of church practices and customs and things like that. Right? Guthrum never fights again. I mean, he might have some little skirmishes, but he doesn't take arms up against Alfred. Okay? So Alfred, because of that treaty, he gets 20 years of peace. From 878 until he dies in 899. That 20 years of peace, he spends building England. Okay? How? Cultural reforms. He starts schools. Okay? He starts scriptoria. That is, these are monasteries with the specific purpose of, other than praying, okay, the monks are employed producing manuscripts. He founds the Royal Navy. He invents, oddly enough, the lantern. Nobody had come up with the idea before of taking, like ram's horn, hollowing it out really, really, really thin so that light could shine through it, putting it over a candle, and going outside at night. Previously, you had to go outside, to use the loo. You take a candle, the wind blows it out. You're in the dark. Okay? What else? He sets about a translation program. He wants to translate the most important books into English so that those people who are learning to read can read. What books does he translate? He translates, or has translated. There's still debate as to whether or not Alfred translates any of these. He has Gregory the Great's Cura Pastoralis, or the pastoral care. I'll write these down. Gregory's Pastoral Care. That is a book designed for priests about how to be a good priest. Right? He also does Gregory's Dialogues. Okay? He does Boethius, Consolation of Philosophy, most important book of the Middle Ages. He does Orosius's History of the World, or History Against the Pagans. It's one of those two. And he does a book that was written by an Englishman, but it wasn't written in English. Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English people. Alfred thought, we have our own history. People ought to know their culture and their own heritage, but it's not in our own language, because Bede wrote everything in Latin. So, in that section where Bede talks about Cadman, in his history, he says, when he gives Cadman's hymn, he gives it in Latin. And he says, now, this isn't the real thing. This is a translation which is a gist of the original. He said, because we all know when you translate from one language to another, you lose the original. So Alfred knew that. And Alfred wants to put Bede into English, even though it's not the original. Okay? And we do have multiple copies of Cadman's hymn in Old English. One's in France. There's several in the United Kingdom. One is at the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia, in an Old English manuscript. His descendants then go on to reconquer lost territory. His grandson, Athelstan, I think it's his grandson, pretty much unites, let me back this up, unites all of this under England. He fights a battle of 5 armies. For those of you who are Tolkien fans, that's where Tolkien gets it from. Okay, fights against the King of Scotland, I think King of Ireland, and 3 Viking kings. Okay, defeats them. But it's not to last. Okay, Alfred dies in 899. In 979, less than 100 years later, his great-grandson becomes king. Athelred Unrad. Okay? Unrad, unwise, ill-prepared. We still have that word rad in modern English, by the way. We have it used in one instance. And the modern English form of it is read. As in Miranda rights. When you are read your rights, it doesn't mean the cop is reading from a card. It means you're being advised your rights. It's the only way that word is used in its Old English context today. Okay? Athelred becomes king, 979. His name is often, the epithet, is often translated the unready. It's not that he was unready. It's that he was a fool. Okay? The Danes renew their attacks. They've kind of been hitting off and on before Athelred. But Athelred tries to buy the Danes off. He offers tribute. 991, a thing that's not up here. 991, you have the famous Battle of Maldon. Right? Where an English force, led by an English chieftain named Byrhtnoth, battles against a Viking force, a much larger Viking force. They don't have to, because the Vikings have been paid off. They battle them and they get slaughtered. But out of it comes one of the greatest pieces of English heroic literature, the Battle of Maldon. Okay? Probably written a couple of years after the battle, and probably written by somebody who observed the battle from a distance. It's got great speeches in it. Probably none of them ever actually happened, because everybody who fought in the battle, everybody who fought heroically in the battle, died. There were 3 or 4 men who fled, who were cowards, and they don't figure very well in the poem, so it's pretty sure that they didn't compose the poem. Okay? Athelred abdicates the throne in 1014. Okay? Flees to France, and he dies in 1016. He flees to France with his son, but he leaves his wife behind. Canute, king of Norway, becomes king in 1016. Canute's the son of Svein Forkbeard. Okay. Svein was the one who launched the initial invasion in 1014. Okay, that caused Athelred to flee to France. Canute marries Athelred's wife. Okay, it's from this marriage, ultimately, if I remember correctly, because I'm always getting this mixed up, that William the Conqueror has a claim to the throne. Okay. Canute reigns until 1035. Okay, notice he's the king of England and Norway. Canute is Christian, by the way. He dies. His son, whose name I'm drawing a blank on, reigns for 7 years. He then dies in 1042. Alfred's descendants again regain the throne in 1042 with Edward the Confessor. Okay? Edward is Alfred's oldest son. Edward reigns until 1066 when he dies. But in the mid-1050s, one of Edward's most important men, a man named Harold Godwinson, is captured by William of Normandy. And he agrees, kind of under duress, he agrees with William that should Edward die without heir, William's claim to the throne will be honored. Okay? Harold has no logical claim to the throne. There's no blood relation. Okay? But Edward dies. He actually dies on January 1st. I don't know how I got January 4th on there. He actually dies on January 1st, 1066. And Harold Godwinson is crowned king on January 4th. Okay. Notice Harold's last name. Godwin's son. Godwin is the Earl of Mercia. He is the most powerful man in England next to the king. So when the king dies, the most powerful man in England makes his son king. Okay. He doesn't do it by himself. Edward's counselors, his what's called the Veton, okay, elect him king. They don't choose Harold's older brother. Harold's older brother, Tosti, leaves England. He's pissed, essentially. He goes off to Norway. He starts raising a ruckus up in Norway. Skip down a little bit. So he goes up to Norway and he appeals to Harald Hardrada, hard ruler. Not the kind of guy you want to cross necessarily. And he kind of fires up Harald Hardrada. So you have William, Duke of Normandy, claiming the throne. You have Harold Godwinson, who's been made king. And now you have Harold Hardrada, king of Norway, thinking, well, my grandfather was king of England. I should have a claim. Okay? So, what happens? You get two major battles in 1066. September 25th, you have the Battle of Stamford Bridge, where Harold Godwinson marches and raises an army from London to Yorkshire in 4 days. He marches 185 miles in 4 days. It's like 66 miles a day. Mostly, these men are on foot. 46 miles a day. Okay? He has to raise an army. They don't have a standing army. He has his personal, what are called housecarls, which would be like Secret Service, his very well-trained soldiers. Keep in mind, what time of year is this? September 25th. What are people going to be out in the fields doing? Harvesting for winter. Okay? So he has to raise an army. He's got to get farmers to leave their fields, go off to battle with their pitchforks, if they have a sword or spear with that. If they don't, with a pitchfork or hoe or spade or hammer. Okay? They go up to Stamford Bridge. Harold defeats them. Harold Godwinson defeats them. And it's while he's up there that word reaches him, William of Normandy has landed on the southern coast. So now he has to march not only back to London, but he's then got to march from London to the southern coast and raise a new army. Because the men that he raised to fight Harold Hardrada are not legally bound to fight in this new battle against William the Conqueror. So now he's got 250 miles to march in 2 weeks. Okay. Harold's tired. His personal warriors, soldiers, are tired. But they march down and they fight at what's called the Battle of Hastings, which is kind of a misnomer because it's not really at Hastings. Hastings is about 5 miles from the actual battle site. Where the battle is today is a town called Battle. It was begun after the battle. Okay? And if you go there today, all the trips I've done to London, it's been one of the best kind of touristy things to do because they've got a very good kind of visual and stuff you can listen to. The site has changed a lot in 1,000 years, obviously. The top of the mound, the hill that the battle was fought on, was essentially cut off by William the Conqueror. Okay? So here's what happened. You got here how the armies were arrayed. And we'll take a break in just a moment because I know it's going long. All right? You've got Harold's housecarls here and then the rest of the English troops here. Okay? This represents a bluff of sorts. It's a hilltop. Okay? And then you have William's forces down here. Okay? Armored infantry and archers, and then the cavalry off the sides. And here's what happens. There are 3 charges by the mounted cavalry. Okay, they're going uphill. And at this time, it was a pretty steep hill. It was like 30 degrees. Okay? So they're marching uphill. Basic military strategy tells you, if you can choose your position, always take the high ground. William, for some reason, took the low ground. Nobody knows why. Okay? Anyways, they attack. They charge. The English repel them. The English have created a shield wall. The shield wall is almost impenetrable unless somebody in the wall breaks it. Okay? Arms are locked. Shields are locked. So you have one free arm to use with a spear or a sword to go under the shields or over the shields. The French attack again. The English repel them. The French attack a third time. And this time the English shield wall breaks. Because they see the French retreating again and they think they have them on the run. And they attack. And what they do, by having primarily it's these 2 side groups, which are not the trained soldiers. These 2 go in and attack like that. The mounted cavalry that's been sitting in the back, essentially hiding, they've not been in view. They do a flanking pincher movement from the sides. And like between an anvil and a hammer. Okay? They nail the English. Harold Godwinson, according to anecdotal history, dies from an arrow in the eye. Okay? William feels really bad about what he's done. Well, after a few years he does. He goes on, he defeats the English at this battle. He is crowned King of the English on Christmas Day, the year 1066. And he has an abbey built. And he has the high altar placed on the exact spot, according to anecdote, where Harold Godwinson died. If you go to battle today, all that remains are a couple of the side walls, because Henry VIII morons destroyed the abbey with the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century, which we'll talk about at that point. Okay. Let's stop there. Let's take a break. I've got 10:42, so I'll be back like at 7:42, so I'll be back like at 7:50, and then we'll go over the language part.